The storm raged outside, thunder cracking like a whip across the neon-lit skyline as Elias Carter stared at his phone, his thumb hovering over the glowing accept button. Rain battered the window of his cramped apartment, distorting the cityscape into a blur of vibrant, bleeding colors. The app's interface pulsed with an eerie blue glow, its promise of unlimited possibilities too tempting to resist. "What else do I have to lose?" he muttered under his breath, casting a glance at the termination notice on his desk. The engineering firm he had devoted the last 5 years of his life to had just let him go, citing corporate restructuring. At 32, Elias was watching the pieces of his carefully crafted life fall apart. With a sigh, Elias grabbed his worn notebook, flipping through pages of technical sketches and personal notes until he reached an empty page. He scribbled the date, followed by a single line. "Sometimes the best decisions come from desperation." The app chirped impatiently. Taking a deep breath, Elias pressed accept. The screen flooded with dense legal text, the contract clauses scrolling past at an impossible speed. He tried to scroll back, but a sharp pain shot through his temple. The signature line pulsed, urging him to sign. "Fine," he growled, tapping his finger onto the screen, scrawling his digital signature. "Whatever gets me out of this mess." As soon as he confirmed, the phone went black. Elias frowned and tapped the screen repeatedly. Nothing. He was about to take out the battery when a thunderous knock echoed from the door. He stiffened, glancing through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Another knock, this one even louder, rattling the doorframe. He hesitated, then slowly opened the door, freezing in shock as he saw her. She stood tall and athletic, wearing sleek combat armor that seemed to absorb the light around her. But it was her skin that caught his attention, an iridescent shade of violet that shimmered in the dim light. Her eyes were a striking molten gold, and her full lips curved into a smile that was both predatory and playful. "Greetings, Master Elias Carter," she purred, her voice resonating with a strange, almost otherworldly timbre. "I am Freya, your contracted guardian and servant." She dropped into a graceful bow, her long silver hair cascading over her shoulders. Elias stumbled backward. "What? Who are you?" Freya straightened up, the door closing behind her with impossible speed. "As I said, I am your contracted servant. The terms were quite clear in the agreement you just signed," she said, her golden eyes sparkling with amusement. "Did you not read them?" Elias' back hit the wall, his mind racing. "This isn't possible. You're not real." Freya took a step closer, her movements fluid and graceful, almost like liquid mercury. "I assure you, Master, I am very real." She raised her hand, and a shimmering sphere of energy appeared above her palm. "And I am completely at your service." His engineering mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "This is some kind of elaborate scam, holograms maybe." Freya's laughter rang out, like the sound of crystal chimes. "Your skepticism is charming but unnecessary." She gestured, and the energy sphere expanded into a holographic display of the contract he had signed. "You are now my designated bearer. I am bound to protect and serve you, to enhance your natural abilities," she said with a mischievous smile, "and to fulfill any other requirements you may have." "Requirements?" Elias' voice cracked as he tried to maintain control. "Look, I don't know what's going on here, but I didn't sign up for this." Freya's golden eyes narrowed as she zoomed in on a specific clause. "You quite literally did, though. Most bearers at least skim the terms, but you," she cocked her head, studying him with undisguised interest. "You're either very brave or very desperate. Which is it, I wonder?" Before Elias could respond, his phone buzzed back to life, lighting up with notifications. He grabbed it, hoping for some explanation, but instead he found a series of menacing messages from unknown numbers. "Contract detected. Unauthorized activation. Surrender the artifact." Freya's playful demeanor vanished in an instant. She moved with liquid grace to the window, her armor shifting and reconfiguring. "We have company, Master." "What?" Elias joined her at the window, his gaze locking on the street below. Black SUVs were pulling up to the building, disgorging figures clad in tactical gear. "Quantech security forces," Freya's voice had turned steely. "They've been hunting the contract artifact for decades. And now they've found us." She turned to him, her golden eyes intense. "We need to leave. Now." "Leave? I can't just—" His protest was cut short by the heavy thudding of boots in the hallway. Freya's armor rippled, extending protective plates over her body. She stepped between Elias and the door, her voice cold. "Stay behind me." The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. Armed figures poured into the room, weapons raised. Their leader, a woman in a sharp business suit, stepped forward. "Mr. Carter," she said smoothly. "I'm Director Yvonne from Quantech. You've accidentally accessed corporate property. Hand over the contract artifact, and we can resolve this peacefully." "He will do no such thing," Freya's voice was icy. "The contract is sealed. Any attempt to interfere will result in immediate defensive action." Yvonne's smile turned frosty. "So be it." She raised her hand and the tactical team surged forward. Freya moved like a blur, her body flowing between attacks with impossible grace. She deflected bullets with energy shields, tossed armored men aside like ragdolls, and kept Elias safely behind her. "Master," she called over her shoulder, "I need your focus." "What?" Elias ducked as a stray shot shattered the window. "Your emotions. Your intent. The contract connects us. Feel it?" His heart hammered in his chest. This was insane. Impossible. And yet, he could feel it. A warmth, an unspoken connection to this violet-skinned warrior protecting him. Instinct took over. He reached out with that feeling. Freya gasped as purple energy crackled around her, her movements speeding up, her attacks growing fiercer. She spun through the remaining attackers like a deadly dance, leaving them unconscious but alive. Back at the door, Freya spoke rapidly into her communicator. "Subject is bonded. Repeat, contract is active. Initiate Protocol Omega." "Time to go," she said, grabbing Elias by the arm. He barely had time to grab his notebook before she pulled him toward the broken window. "Do you trust me?" "What? No. I just met you." Freya grinned. "Good answer. But trust me anyway." Before Elias could protest, she wrapped her arms around him and leaped through the shattered window. They plummeted 20 stories toward the rain-soaked street, and Elias' scream was swallowed by the howling wind. But instead of death, a surge of energy blossomed around them. Freya's armor shifted, sprouting crystalline wings that caught the air. They soared over the city, leaving the Quantech forces far behind. "What the hell is happening?" Elias shouted over the wind. "You signed a contract, Master." Freya's eyes sparkled with excitement. "And now your life is going to get very, very interesting." As they flew through the neon canyon of skyscrapers, Elias realized with a sinking feeling that his simple hope for a better job had just thrust him into something far more dangerous. And the violet-skinned warrior holding him seemed absolutely thrilled about it. The city blurred beneath them as Freya navigated between the towering buildings with practiced ease. The rain lashed against Elias' face, but he barely noticed, mesmerized by the impossible situation he found himself in. The ground below seemed impossibly far away, but somehow he wasn't as terrified as he should have been. "We need somewhere safe," Freya said, banking sharply around a corner. "Your apartment is compromised." Elias wiped the rain from his eyes. "I have a workshop. An old machine shop on the edge of the industrial district. Nobody knows about it." "Perfect," Freya said, adjusting their course. As Elias guided them through the maze of buildings, he couldn't help but notice how naturally Freya held him, how her armor seemed to adapt, making him more comfortable despite their breakneck speed. The strange energy that had flared up during the battle still hummed between them, like a low electrical current. They landed in a narrow alley behind a crumbling brick building. Freya set Elias down gently, her crystalline wings folding back into her armor with fluid precision. She immediately took up a defensive position, scanning their surroundings. "This way," Elias said, leading her to a rusty door. His hands were trembling slightly as he unlocked it. "It's not much, but the workshop is a big open space, filled with half-finished projects and tools. No one knows about it." Freya moved through the space with predatory grace, checking exits and sight lines. "Defensible. Multiple escape routes. You chose well, Master." "Stop calling me that," Elias muttered, running a hand through his damp hair. "Just stop. I need answers. Real ones. What exactly did I sign up for?" Freya finished her inspection and turned to face him. "What you signed up for, Elias Carter, is a future you never saw coming." Chapter 2, The Terms of the Contract. Elias sat down at the workbench in the dimly lit corner of the workshop, rubbing his temples as the events of the past hour crashed into his consciousness. The sound of rain pattering against the workshop's metal roof was the only thing that anchored him to reality, but even that felt distant as his mind tried to process everything. Freya stood by the door, her golden eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Despite her calm demeanor, Elias could see the tension in the way her muscles were coiled, ready to spring into action at any moment. The way she moved, so fluid, so confident, was like nothing he had ever seen before. It was like she was from a world entirely different from his own. "So," he said, breaking the silence, "I signed a contract and now I'm stuck with you. But I still don't understand exactly what I agreed to." Freya's head tilted slightly, her silver hair catching the low light as she studied him. She had removed her combat helmet, revealing the full expanse of her violet skin, which shimmered faintly in the shadows. It was hard to look away. Everything about her seemed unreal, like a living dream that shouldn't exist. "You didn't just sign any contract, Elias," Freya said, her voice low but steady. "You signed a contract binding you to me, to protect you and serve you in ways you can't begin to understand yet." She stepped closer, her movement as graceful as ever, but there was an edge to her presence now, a sense of purpose. "The contract connects us, and through it I can enhance your abilities, both physical and mental. You'll gain access to knowledge and power beyond your comprehension. But it's not just about what I can give you. It's about what you need. What I need." Elias repeated, still struggling to wrap his head around the idea of being bound to an alien warrior with glowing golden eyes and violet skin. "I didn't sign up for this kind of help. I thought I was signing up for a job, a new opportunity. Not whatever this is." Freya's gaze softened, but there was no pity in her eyes, only understanding. "You're not the first to make that mistake, Elias. Most people don't read the fine print. They think it's a simple transaction, a way out of their problems. But the moment you signed, you bound yourself to a higher purpose. One that goes beyond your personal desires." Elias leaned forward, gripping the edge of the workbench as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. "I didn't want any of this. I just wanted a chance at something better. A fresh start." Freya's expression grew more serious. She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing slightly as if considering him more carefully. "And now you have it. The contract doesn't just give you power, it changes the path you walk. There's no going back, Elias. There's no undoing it. You made a choice. And now we have to face the consequences together." Elias swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words sink in. The storm outside seemed to mirror the turmoil inside him, the pounding rain outside now sounding like the beating of his own anxious heart. He had never been one for grand ambitions or dreams of heroism. He had just wanted stability, a good job, a sense of purpose. Instead, he was staring into the abyss of something far greater than he could understand. "And what happens now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Freya uncrossed her arms and stepped closer to him, her golden eyes locked onto his. "Now we prepare. The Quantech forces will be relentless. They've been tracking these contracts for years, hunting down those who signed them. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want. And we—" A loud crash interrupted her, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps echoing down the alley outside. Elias' heart skipped a beat. He stood up too quickly, knocking over a pile of old schematics. He rushed toward the window, but before he could even get a glimpse of what was happening outside, Freya's hand was on his shoulder, pushing him back gently. "Stay here," she said, her voice sharp with authority. "I'll handle this." Elias didn't have time to argue. He barely had time to process the words before Freya was already moving, her form a blur as she sprinted toward the door. There was no hesitation in her movements, only a deadly precision. He followed her out of the room, his heart racing. The door to the workshop slammed open just as another black SUV pulled up outside, skidding to a stop with a screech of tires. Elias' eyes widened as several armed men in tactical gear spilled out, weapons drawn. But it wasn't just the sight of the soldiers that made his stomach turn, it was the unmistakable insignia on their uniforms. "Quantech," he muttered, the realization dawning on him. Freya appeared in the doorway, her figure now fully armored, her crystalline wings unfurling from her back like the wings of some mythical creature. She stood at the front of the building, facing the soldiers with a predatory grace. Her golden eyes locked onto the leader of the group, a tall man with a stern expression. "Step away from the door and we can do this the easy way," the man said, his voice cold. Freya's smile was anything but reassuring. "I'm afraid that's not an option." Without warning, she lunged forward, her form a blur of speed and precision. The soldiers barely had time to react before she was upon them, her movements a series of fluid strikes. Elias could only watch in awe as she dispatched the soldiers with ease. One blow to the chest here, a quick twist of the arm there, sending them sprawling to the ground, unconscious but alive. The leader of the squad drew his weapon, aiming directly at Freya, but before he could fire, she had already closed the distance, her hand wrapping around the barrel of the gun and twisting it out of his grip. "You're making a mistake," the man growled, backing up. Freya's expression remained unchanged. "No, you are." She snapped her fingers and a burst of energy erupted from her palm, knocking the man off his feet and sending him skidding across the pavement. The rest of the soldiers were already retreating, realizing they were no match for the alien warrior. Elias stood frozen in the doorway, his mouth dry, unable to fully comprehend what he had just witnessed. This was no illusion, no trick. Freya wasn't just a skilled fighter, she was something far beyond human. Freya turned to him, her eyes glowing with an intensity that made his heart race. I told you, Elias. There's no going back now. You're mine to protect. And no one, not even Quantech, will take you from me. Before Elias could respond, Freya was already pulling him back inside the workshop, slamming the door shut behind them. She stood in front of it, scanning the surroundings with her sharp, golden eyes. We need to leave, she said. They'll be back. And next time they won't be alone. Elias opened his mouth to protest but found that he had no words. Everything was happening too fast and he was utterly out of his depth. But as he looked into Freya's eyes, he knew one thing for certain. His life would never be the same again. And for better or for worse, he had no choice but to trust the violet-skinned warrior who now held his fate in her hands. Chapter 3. Into the Unknown. Elias barely had time to steady his breath before Freya was already at the workbench, rifling through the scattered tools and blueprints with a speed that was nothing short of mesmerizing. Her every movement was purposeful, as if she already knew what needed to be done. The quiet hum of the workshop, the only sound beside the distant storm, seemed oddly distant as Elias tried to process the chaos that had just unfolded. The man in the black SUV, Director Ivan, the one who had led the assault, wasn't going to give up that easily. Elias could feel it. They had already broken into his apartment once. If they found out about the workshop. Freya glanced over at him, her golden eyes intense but not unkind. We need to move quickly, Elias. The Quantech forces will regroup. If they discover where we are, they'll come back in greater numbers. Elias swallowed, nodding slowly. His hands were shaking as he wiped rain from his face. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was disbelief, a deep, sinking realization that his life was now bound to something far bigger than he had ever imagined. Where are we going? He asked hoarsely. Where can we go? This is insane. Freya turned back to him, her expression calm yet unwavering. You need to trust me. There's a safe house, a location I can access that isn't compromised. We can lay low there until we figure out how to deal with Quantech. Safe house. Elias blinked. You mean you have other places like this? Her eyes glinted, a wisp of amusement in them. You're not the only one with secrets, Elias. He didn't have the energy to ask more questions. His mind was reeling and all he could focus on was the fact that the world he once knew, his steady, predictable life, had just been flipped upside down. A single contract had done this. One signature. Freya moved toward the window and pulled it open with an ease that made Elias's jaw tighten. The rain had not let up. The storm outside was only getting worse. But Freya was unfazed, standing at the edge of the frame, her body already tense, ready for whatever came next. We don't have time to waste, she said simply, her voice cutting through his swirling thoughts. Get your things and let's go. Elias moved in a daze, grabbing his old leather jacket from the hook by the door and stuffing it into his bag. His heart was still racing from the adrenaline, the memory of the battle outside fresh in his mind. Despite her calm demeanor, Freya was an absolute force of nature. Someone who could disarm a squad of tactical soldiers without breaking a sweat. He had no doubt she could protect him, but what did it mean for him? What did it mean for his future? As Elias grabbed his notebook, the only piece of his old life he could stand to take with him, he saw Freya glancing out the window again. Her gaze was sharp, eyes scanning the streets below. He was starting to understand something about her. She wasn't just his protector, she was a survivor hardened by years of battles he couldn't even begin to fathom. He was nothing like her. And yet, here they were, bound together by a contract he never meant to sign. Are you ready? Freya asked, her voice cool, though a hint of urgency lingered beneath it. He nodded. Let's go. Before Elias could fully process his next move, Freya had already leaped out of the window, her crystalline wings unfolding in a burst of shimmering light. Elias's heart jumped into his throat as he rushed to follow, but by the time he reached the window, she was already soaring above the city, cutting through the rain-soaked sky like an avenging angel. And then it hit him. I'm flying. His stomach twisted with a mix of awe and fear as he saw Freya's wings propel her effortlessly between towering skyscrapers. The wind howled in his ears, and despite his anxiety, Elias found himself enjoying the feeling. An odd sense of liberation, the sense that for once he was free. Follow me? Freya shouted, her voice echoing through the wind. She banked hard to the left, and Elias followed her instinctively, his eyes fixed on the silhouette of her violet-skinned form as she darted between the buildings. For a moment, all he could think about was how small and insignificant the world below seemed. The city, his city, was a blur of neon lights and towering structures, but there was something more exhilarating than terrifying about the view. But then, just as quickly as the exhilaration had come, a loud whirring sound filled the air. Elias's heart skipped a beat as a squad of black military helicopters appeared, flying in tight formation toward them. The low rumble of their engines was unmistakable. "Quantech," Elias whispered under his breath. Freya's golden eyes flicked back toward him, narrowing with a sharp focus. "Hold on tight. We're not going down without a fight." Before Elias could react, Freya surged upward, her wings flapping powerfully, propelling them higher into the stormy night sky. She was faster than any aircraft Elias had ever seen, cutting through the air like a bullet. The helicopters followed, their guns locking on. A sudden flash of light streaked past them, an energy blast, narrowly missing them by mere inches. Elias gasped, instinctively gripping onto Freya's waist tighter as they continued their high-speed flight. "You need to focus, Elias," Freya called, her voice strained against the wind. "We can't outrun them forever. The contract connects us. Tap into that power, feel it, and help me." The words hung in the air for a moment, and for the first time since the contract had activated, Elias felt a flicker of something inside him. Something strange, like a surge of warmth spreading through his chest. He could feel it, the connection to Freya. Not just physical but something deeper, more primal. "Focus, Elias," Freya urged again. "Feel it and fight back." Elias took a deep breath, forcing himself to push past his panic. He closed his eyes for a brief second, and in that moment, the warmth in his chest intensified. Energy surged through him, and with a sharp exhale, he opened his eyes. He could feel it now. A pulse of raw energy, as if the contract itself had unlocked something within him. The sensation spread outward, flowing through his veins like liquid fire, ready to be released. With a deep breath, he raised his hands toward the helicopters, his fingers crackling with newfound power. And with a force he couldn't quite understand, a wave of violet energy surged from his palms, striking one of the helicopters head-on. The blast sent the craft spiraling out of control, its tail engulfed in flames as it plummeted toward the ground. Elias's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he tried to process what he had just done. "Nice shot, Master," Freya said, her voice laced with approval. Elias barely had time to react before she veered sharply, sending them into a dive toward the city streets below. The remaining helicopters followed in hot pursuit, their weapons locked on them. But this time Elias was ready. As they dove toward the earth, he concentrated once more, his hands glowing with a surge of violet energy. He thrust his palms outward, sending another pulse of power toward the remaining helicopters. This time, the energy exploded with a blinding flash, sending the helicopters scattering in every direction, unable to keep up with their speed. Freya's wings flared out, catching the wind as they soared through the chaos. For the first time since everything had begun, Elias felt a sense of certainty, a sense of power, and for better or worse he knew his life was forever changed. "Let's get out of here," Freya said, her golden eyes meeting his as they flew through the storm. And as they vanished into the night, Elias realized the path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. He was no longer just an ordinary man. Chapter 4. A Dangerous Bond. Elias's heart still raced, the adrenaline of the escape coursing through his veins, even as they descended toward the ground. His mind was reeling with the enormity of what had just happened. He had just taken down an entire squad of helicopters with nothing more than raw energy and a hunch. Felt like a dream. Yet, as he looked over at Freya, her violet skin glowing faintly in the storm's dim light, he realized it was all too real. The cityscape below them blurred as Freya expertly navigated them through tight alleyways and between skyscrapers. The helicopters were still on their tail, but at least for now they had a lead. Elias's grip tightened around her waist, his fingers still tingling from the last blast of energy he had unleashed. He didn't know how or why he had the power to do that, but there was no time to figure it out. They needed to get to safety. Freya's voice cut through his thoughts. "We're almost there. Hold on." Elias squinted through the rain and wind, barely catching a glimpse of the industrial district he had directed her toward. The streets were empty, save for a few stray cars and flickering lights. It looked like the perfect place to hide, isolated, with little traffic or attention from the city's more affluent districts. It was a place no one would think to look for them. They landed with a soft thud on the roof of an old, dilapidated building, hidden from view by the larger structures around them. Freya immediately dropped to a crouch, scanning the surroundings. Elias jumped down after her, his legs weak from the flight, but his feet steady enough to support his weight. He wasn't quite sure how long they had been flying, but it felt like hours. As Freya moved swiftly to the rooftop's edge, Elias's mind finally started to catch up with what had just happened. The sheer intensity of the escape, the shock of discovering the power within him, it was all too much to process at once. He looked over at Freya, who was crouched low to the ground, her golden eyes flashing in the dim light. Her armor had shifted back into its sleek form, and she now looked every bit the deadly warrior she had proven herself to be. Her silvery hair shimmered in the glow of the distant city lights, but Elias could see the exhaustion in her posture, the strain in her movements. "I know you have questions," Freya said, her voice low but steady as though she were anticipating his next move. "But we need to be quick. They're not far behind." Elias nodded, his throat dry. "What is this? The contract? What exactly did I sign up for? I don't even remember half of it." Freya turned to face him, her eyes softening just slightly. "The contract connects us. It's not something you can just walk away from now. But that doesn't mean you're alone in this. You've made a powerful ally." "An alien ally," Elias muttered, still unable to fully grasp the reality of his situation. "I still don't get it. I'm just a guy trying to make it in the city. I was hoping for a new job, a new opportunity, not a warrior." Freya stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "You signed a contract, Elias. Whether you knew it or not, it was a bond between us. I'm your guardian and your protector. The terms are simple. I defend you, enhance your abilities, and guide you through what's to come. You're not just a guy anymore, you're now part of something much larger." Her words hit him like a blow to the chest. Part of something larger? Was that supposed to comfort him? The world outside the apartment had already shattered into pieces, and now Freya was telling him he was bound to her, and by extension to whatever forces were hunting them. "Quantech," Elias said, finally bringing up the question he couldn't avoid any longer. "They're after the contract." "After me? Why?" Freya's expression darkened. "Quantech has been hunting for the artifact you just signed for decades. They are a private corporation with access to the most advanced technologies, so advanced that they believe they can control entire sectors of the galaxy. Your contract is an artifact of immense power. It binds two souls together, granting abilities far beyond what most humans can comprehend." "Wait, souls?" Elias blinked, the idea of being bound to someone's soul like that almost too much to process. "What do you mean bound? What does it do to me? You feel it, don't you?" Freya's voice was softer now, almost coaxing, as if trying to help him understand. "The connection between us is growing stronger. The more you embrace it, the more you'll be able to use the power it offers." Elias's pulse quickened at the thought. "What kind of power?" Freya's smile was small but knowing. "You've already felt a taste of it. The energy you wield, when you call on it, it strengthens me too. I'm able to use more of my own power to defend you, to fight. But it's not just defense. The more we bond, the more we will both grow stronger. And trust me, Elias, you're going to need that strength. Because Quantech will not stop until they get what they want. And they won't hesitate to destroy everything in their path." Elias shuddered at the thought. The idea of Quantech hunting him like an animal, of the entire world being turned upside down, was almost too much to bear. But he couldn't afford to back down. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. "I'm not going to let them take me. Or you," Elias said, his voice a little stronger than he felt. Freya's golden eyes flickered with approval. "Good. You're beginning to understand. The contract has sealed your fate, Elias. There's no going back. But you'll have me by your side. Together we can take on anything." Elias exhaled slowly, trying to focus on what she had said. He was still terrified, of the unknown, of what Quantech would do next, of what the future held, but for the first time since he had signed that damn contract he felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could do this. "Where do we go now?" he asked, looking out at the rain-slicked streets below. Freya didn't hesitate. "We lay low for now. But we'll need allies if we're going to survive. And we need to find out what Quantech knows about you. It's not just the contract they're after. They're hunting for something more." Elias nodded, determination beginning to take root in his chest. He wasn't alone anymore. And whatever came next, he was going to face it head-on. He had to. For his own survival. For the survival of the alien warrior who had just saved his life. And for the future that had just been thrust upon him. "I'm with you," Elias said, his voice firm. Let's take them down. Freya's eyes gleamed with pride and something darker, something fierce. Good. Then let's get started. Together, they turned toward the darkness ahead, the unknown dangers of the world waiting for them. And somewhere in the depths of the city, Quanteca's forces were already closing in. Chapter 5. The Gathering Storm. The silence in the industrial district was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of rainwater from the fire escape and the distant hum of a city that never truly slept. Elias sat at the metal workbench in the corner of the workshop, still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. His fingers traced over the blueprints for a project he had abandoned long ago, as if the familiar symbols could provide some comfort in the midst of all the chaos. Across the room, Freya moved like a shadow, her every step graceful, her armor shifting to suit her needs. She had already checked the entrances and windows, making sure they were secure. The place was far from ideal, but it was theirs for now. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting an eerie glow over the scattered machines and half-finished projects. Stop overthinking it, Freya's voice cut through his thoughts. She was standing beside the makeshift kitchen area, her golden eyes locked on him. You're making your head spin. We don't have time for that. Elias exhaled sharply, trying to clear his head. I don't know what else to do, Freya. One minute I'm a normal guy, picking up the pieces of my life after getting laid off. The next, I'm bound to an alien warrior I can shoot energy blasts, and now some corporate monster is after me for... what? A contract. Not just any contract, she replied, her tone a little softer now. It's a powerful binding agreement. It ties us together in ways that go beyond just protection. The more we bond, the more you'll unlock. But it's not all about power. It's about survival. We can't stay hidden here for long. Quantec will come for us. And they won't stop until they have everything. Elias rubbed his temples, trying to force himself to focus. So what do we do now? They've already tracked me once. They'll find us again. Freya's gaze flickered to the window, where the faint outline of distant searchlights cut through the rain. We need information. And allies. Quantec has been hunting beings like me for years, trying to capture and control them. If they have the contract, they'll have access to the technology they need to change everything. The sooner we find out what they know about you, the better. You're a key, Elias. You've activated something. And they'll stop at nothing to get you. Why me? Why not someone else? I don't know, she said with a small shrug, but there was something unreadable in her eyes. But whatever they're after, it's tied to your signature on that contract. And that's why we're going to find out. Elias nodded slowly, trying to suppress the panic rising in his chest. It didn't make sense. He had never been anything special. Just a guy who had spent his years working for a company that had never truly valued him. Now, everything he thought he understood about the world was being turned upside down. Freya stepped forward, her presence somehow calming. First things first, we need to lay low. The next few days will be critical. I'll make sure we're safe here for now. I'll also try to track down any leads on Quanteca's movements, see if we can pinpoint their next move. Elias stood up, the weight of the situation beginning to settle over him like a heavy cloak. You really think they'll stop at nothing to get me, don't you? Absolutely, Freya answered firmly, her eyes glowing with a cold intensity. They'll do whatever it takes. But you're not alone, Elias. You have me. And I won't let them take you without a fight. For a moment he just stood there, staring at her. She was an alien. A powerful, deadly warrior who had come from who knew where. But somehow, in the strange connection between them, he found a sense of reassurance. He wasn't completely powerless. Not anymore. What's next? He asked quietly. Freya moved toward the table where his notebook was still open, a few scattered pieces of paper around it. We need to plan. The contract might have other clauses that we don't fully understand yet. If we're going to outsmart Quantec, we need to know everything. She paused, her gaze flicking to the doorway. And there's someone we can talk to. A contact of mine. He's been keeping an eye on Quantec for years. If anyone can help us figure out what they want with you, it's him. Elias's brow furrowed. And where do we find him? Freya smiled, her eyes glinting with a mischievous edge. Don't worry. I've already arranged for that. Before Elias could ask any more questions, there was a sudden knocking at the workshop door. The sound was soft but deliberate, and it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Freya's head whipped around, and she immediately moved to the door, her hand hovering over the handle. Elias instinctively moved behind her, watching her every move. You were expecting someone? He whispered. Freya's eyes were narrowed, her hand resting on the hilt of a hidden blade that had appeared at her side. Not exactly, she murmured, her tone cautious. But I know the knock. A chill ran down Elias's spine as she slowly opened the door. On the other side stood a tall, wiry man with dark hair and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured most of his face. His clothes were dark and nondescript, a long coat covering his body, though his movements betrayed a confidence and familiarity with danger that made Elias uneasy. The man stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his cold, calculating eyes scanning the room before they landed on Freya. "Freya?" he said in a gravelly voice. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Elias tensed. "Who's this?" Freya's lips curved into a thin smile. "This is Vincent. He's a friend." Vincent's eyes flicked toward Elias, giving him a quick once-over. "I've heard a lot about you, Elias. You're the one Quantech is after." Elias's heart skipped a beat. "How do you know that?" "Let's just say," Vincent said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "that I've got connections. Now, if you want to keep breathing, I suggest we talk. And fast." Freya motioned for Elias to stay back, but he could see the tension in her stance, the way she was poised, ready to act at a moment's notice. "This isn't exactly a friendly meeting, is it?" Elias asked, his voice tight with suspicion. "Let's just say I'm not here for small talk," Vincent replied with a smirk. "But I've got the information you need. If you're ready to move." Elias glanced at Freya, who nodded. "We don't have time to waste." Vincent's smile widened. "Good. Let's get to work then." And just like that, the storm that had started the night of his signing was about to escalate even further. The world Elias thought he knew was already gone. What was coming next would change everything. Chapter 6. Into the Fire. The air inside the workshop felt thick with tension, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Vincent, with his inscrutable gaze, moved toward the table where Elias had been sitting earlier. Freya, ever watchful, remained standing by the door, her body poised like a weapon in waiting. Elias wasn't sure if he was supposed to trust the man who had walked into his life uninvited, but something told him that he didn't have much choice. Vincent had the answers, or at least the start of them. "You don't look surprised," Vincent remarked, his eyes scanning the scattered blueprints and tech strewn across the workbench. "Guess Freya's already filled you in. This won't be the first time she's put you in a dangerous position." Freya's eyes narrowed at Vincent's words, but she didn't respond, letting him have the floor for now. "I'm just trying to figure out how much danger I'm actually in," Elias said, his voice edged with a mixture of frustration and fear. "And why it all revolves around this contract." Vincent let out a dry laugh. "Oh, it's not just any contract, kid. Quantech has been hunting artifacts like the one you signed for decades. The tech, the power, the knowledge, it's all part of a bigger picture. A picture that involves you now." He stopped in front of Elias, his voice growing serious. "You're not just some pawn in their game. You're a key. And that's why they won't stop until they get their hands on you." Elias felt a cold shiver crawl up his spine at the words. "What do you mean, a key? What does that even mean?" Vincent leaned against the workbench, crossing his arms. "The contract binds you to Freya. But it's more than that. It's not just a contract between two parties, it's a contract with ancient technology embedded within it. You've activated something inside yourself with that signature of yours, something powerful. The reason they're after you isn't just for the power you have now, it's because they need to unlock the rest of it." Elias's mind raced as the weight of Vincent's words settled on his shoulders. "So, I'm supposed to be some kind of battery? A weapon?" "More like an amplifier," Vincent clarified. "You can tap into the power that Freya has, and with the right triggers you could access more. But you're not alone in this. The power within you, it was meant for a purpose. I just don't know what that purpose is yet." Elias looked over at Freya, whose golden eyes glinted with both concern and something else, something harder, more calculating. "What do you think?" he asked her. Freya stepped forward, her armor gleaming in the dim light. "Vincent's right about one thing. You have untapped potential, Elias. But there's more to this than just raw power. There's a reason you were chosen. It's not by accident. In Quantech they know exactly what you can do. That's why they're coming for you." Elias felt his stomach twist. "Then we need to stop them. We need to figure out how to get ahead of them." Freya's eyes softened for a moment, and her voice took on a more reassuring tone. "We will. But first we need to get more information. Vincent can help with that. He has contacts in places that even Quantech can't reach." Vincent gave a small nod. "And that's where we come in. You're going to need to trust me, Elias. I've been watching Quantech for too long to let them take you without a fight." Before Elias could say anything, the distant sound of engines revving cut through the stillness of the alley outside. Vincent's face hardened. "Time's up," he muttered. "They found us." Freya moved instantly, her hand reaching for the energy sword she had been carrying ever since they met. She glanced at Elias. "Get ready." The noise outside grew louder, the unmistakable sound of black SUVs pulling up, their tires screeching as they came to a stop. Elias's heart thudded in his chest as he heard doors slam, followed by the unmistakable shuffle of boots on wet pavement. The Quantech security forces were closing in. There was no time for second guesses. "Vincent, how many?" Freya asked, her voice calm and controlled. "At least a dozen," Vincent answered. "More if they've brought reinforcements?" Elias's throat went dry. "What do we do?" Freya met his eyes with a seriousness that sent a chill down his spine. "We fight. Or we run." "No running," Elias said, his voice firm. He had come this far and there was no turning back now. He didn't know what he was capable of, but he had to find out. "I'm not going to just hide anymore." Freya smiled slightly, an approving glint in her eyes. "Good. Then we'll make them regret ever finding us." A flash of light outside followed by a burst of static indicated that they had already begun to deploy some kind of EMP, trying to disable their equipment. Freya didn't hesitate. She pulled Elias behind a set of large metal crates and activated her combat mode, her body humming with the energy of the contract they had formed. Her movements were fluid, predatory, a deadly dance that he could barely follow with his eyes. Elias stood behind the crates, his mind racing. He could feel the energy in the air, something deep, ancient, and alien that pulsed around him like a living thing. His chest tightened as he instinctively reached for it. "Focus," Freya called over her shoulder, her voice sharp as she sliced through the air with her energy blade, cutting down one of the armed agents who had tried to approach. "Feel it? You've got to use it." He took a deep breath, pushing away the doubt, focusing on the strange connection between him and Freya. He could feel it, warmth spreading through his chest, building. His hand twitched, and without thinking, he reached out toward the incoming agents. There was a sudden, blinding pulse of purple energy from his fingertips, streaking across the room in a burst of raw power. It hit one of the agents square in the chest, sending him flying backward into the wall with an unearthly crack. Freya's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide. "You did it?" "Holy!" Elias took a shaky breath, his heart racing. He had done it. Somehow, the energy was responding to him. He could feel the contract, the bond, connecting him to Freya, and to the power they had unleashed together. But there was no time to celebrate. The remaining agents were advancing, and Vincent was already drawing his weapon, firing with precision from behind cover. "We need to move," Vincent shouted, his voice sharp. "Now?" Without waiting for a response, Freya grabbed Elias's arm and pulled him toward the back of the workshop. "This way," she said, urgency in her voice. "We've got one last shot at getting out." They burst through the rear exit, sprinting into the night as chaos erupted behind them. The storm that had been brewing was here. The battle for their lives had only just begun. And as Elias ran, he realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The world he knew had been shattered. The questions, the dangers, they were just beginning. But for the first time in his life, he felt something rise within him. Determination. And with that feeling, he knew there was no turning back.